The Whispering Pulse. Autumn wind scoured the faded bricks of the Calhoun Manor. The air smelled of damp leaves and old paper. An archivist's promise come true, Iris Caldwell thought, stepping through the wrought iron gate. The late Victorian mansion rose above her like a silent sentinel, its turrets and gables wrapped in trailing ivy. Candlelight from inside cast long, quivering shadows against lead-pane windows. Tonight, she would catalog dusty ledgers and yellowed letters left untouched for a century. She did not expect to catalog her own heartbeat instead. Iris set her duffel on the polished oak floor. It rang hollow beneath her footfall, an echo through corridors paneled in dark mahogany. She unpacked her tools, laptop, voice recorder, a battered flashlight. Outside, the moon was pale, half hidden by drifting clouds. She moved methodically, recording the names of long-dead occupants. Algernon Calhoun, a marble-jawed industrialist. His spinster sister Lenora, whose obituary whispered ruin and madness. At midnight, the first thump shook the floorboards. Thump, thump, irregular, like a faltering heartbeat. Iris paused, breath caught in her throat. She pictured city traffic, a distant train, anything to keep her calm. But the sound persisted, muffled, coming from the parlor beneath her feet. She knelt, palm flat on the polished wood. Beneath its gloss, she traced a faint seam, an almost invisible hatch. The boards were secured by tiny iron nails, but one corner gave under her pressure. A breath of stale air hissed upward, carrying the faint aroma of machine oil and rust. As she pried the panel, a low, pulsing rhythm swelled. Thump, 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 thump. It rolled through the dark cavity like a distant drum. Her heart ratcheted in time. Iris illuminated the gap. There, on a dusty platform, sat a small gramophone, its brass horn bent, its finish tarnished to a dull green. A record spun slowly on its turntable, though no mechanical connection was visible. The vinyl had no label, only a rough spiral of scratched grooves. She lifted the needle. The pulse roared into her ears, a living throb that seemed too deep for any machine. Each rotation coaxed new echoes from the walls. She nearly dropped her flashlight when a soft voice whispered from the horn, "Help me." It was neither male nor female. Something between breath and wind. It called to her. Shadows danced on the ceiling as she circled the platform. The flashlight beam caught motes of dust, drifting like ghosts. The smell of old leather and damp cedar overwhelmed her senses. Slowly, she lifted the horn to her ear. Her own pulse thundered back at her, amplified, magnified, impossible. Her vision swam. Determined, Iris yanked the gramophone free and carried it into the hallway. The thumping followed her, a chase in her skull. She hurled the device against a stone mantel. It shattered. Horn fragments spun off, but the pulse remained resonating through each shard. She raced down a narrow stairway to the cellar, hands slick with sweat. At the far end, cobweb-strung beams gave way to a trapdoor. Below, a dank air pocket held the same rhythmic beating. Her knees buckled as she pried it open. In the flicker of her flashlight, she saw it. A small crypt carved into the bedrock. Within lay a lacquered casket, its surface carved with swirling vines and unfamiliar runes. The lid was ajar. Inside, Wrapped in decayed linen lay the contorted remains of a man. Across his chest was bound a brass cage. At its center, a small mechanical heart. It pulsed. Its beat was her own.
Alice.
A rasping voice breathed Julian Hale's name, scratched in the wood. Iris stumbled back as the casket convulsed. The mechanical heart clicked faster, rattling its cage. A final, ragged gasp issued from the corpse. The heartbeat cut abruptly. Silence. Dawn found Iris on the gravel drive, rain-damp hair plastered to her face. She wore a threadbare coat borrowed from the mudroom. The manor loomed behind her, windows dark and empty. In her pocket, she discovered the unbroken record fragment. One half circle of vinyl, its grooves faintly throbbing. She climbed into her car and turned the ignition. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the rearview mirror. A pale hand pressed against the parlor window. Then the road swallowed her. That evening, in her city apartment, the fragment lay on her kitchen table. She dared not touch it, but sometimes when the lights flicker, she hears it. Thump, thump, thump. A whisper follows.
Stay with me.
Scurrying shadows. Victor Langley pulled his coat tighter against the autumn chill as he crossed the threshold of the Colden estate. Fog coiled around the wrought iron gates, muting the distant cry of owls. He'd come to spend a solitary weekend in his family's ancestral mansion, an imposing stone behemoth abandoned 2 centuries ago after his great-great-grandfather's infamous crime. Locals still whispered of the Tennant family butchered in the dead of night and of the rats that swarmed the manor floors in the aftermath. Tonight, Victor intended only to edit his latest monograph on colonial justice. He did not expect to become part of the next chapter. The grand entry hall yawned before him, draped in cobwebs and cloaked in shadow. Oil lamps flickered against paneled walls, throwing grotesque shapes that danced like marionettes. Victor set down his leather satchel, its brass buckle glowing faintly. From somewhere above, a cat's low hiss split the silence. Black as spilled ink, Obscura stalked into view, her fur bristling, eyes 2 glinting coals fixed on a distant wall. At midnight, a soft scratching began. Scritch, scratch, behind the east wing paneling. Victor paused over his notes. He told himself it was just old wood settling, or perhaps a few mice seeking refuge. Yet Obscura's hackles rose, and her claws scraped frantically at the baseboard. Their eyes met in the dim light, a silent pact of understanding. Something moved within the walls. Come morning, Victor discovered half a dozen spring traps lined neatly along the kitchen skirting. Each held a bait of cheese, yet not one trap had sprung. Instead, a fine dust lay undisturbed on the floor around them. An untouched circle of silence. His pulse quickened as he remembered the brittle pamphlet he'd found in the study, The Rat King of Colden. The local folklore spoke of hidden catacombs where rats bred in impossible numbers. Protectors of a family's darkest secret. That night, the scratching returned, urgent, desperate. Obscura darted ahead, leading Victor through a labyrinth of corridors to a faded tapestry in the library. With trembling fingers, he peeled it back, revealing a warped hatch set into the floorboards. A putrid draft seeped upward as Victor pried it open, and below lay the first step into dank darkness. Lantern in hand, Victor descended into the bowels of the earth. Each step squelched on moss-slick stone. The air reeked of decay. Ancient graffiti scarred the tunnel walls. Pleas for mercy, names gouged in despair. At its end, the beam fell upon a vast chamber, a writhing mass of red eyes and bristling fur. Thousands of rats, their teeth bared, pressed against the beam of light, claws clicking like bone on bone. Victor stumbled back as the creatures surged, but they halted, forming a corridor for a single skeletal figure that emerged, part rat, part man, its limbs unnaturally elongated. Its voice was a rasp of rusted metal.
You bear his blood.
The word blood echoed in Victor's skull as he recognized the crest embroidered on his satchel, his great-great-grandfather's seal. The creature's hollow eyes bored into him.
The debt remains unpaid.
Fear seized Victor, and he fled up the stairs with rats thundering behind him. He hauled the hatch closed just as claws rattled against its underside. Silence returned, broken only by his ragged breathing. At dawn, villagers found the manor gates ajar. Inside, there was no sign of Victor, only his lantern guttering beside a single snapped spring trap. Obscura sat on the foyer's flagstones, her gaze fixed on the dim hallway. Against the hearth's cold stone lay the tapestry, now face down. On its reverse, fresh scratch marks spelled out two words: "We're hungry." Beneath the floorboards, something stirs. The scratching begins again. The siren in the attic. The village of Wetherby-on-Thames lay cloaked in fog as Evan Fisher trudged up the gravel drive to Ravenscroft Manor. Built in 1882 by a shipwright obsessed with sea shanties, the mansion's gables mimicked the billowing sails of a ghost ship. Floorboards sighed beneath his boots. The air smelled of mothballs and salt, an odd perfume for an inland estate. Evan had arrived to prepare for the most important audition of his career. The London Symphony's principal violindesk. He settled in the dusty attic room, its single dormer window overlooking gnarled oaks. As twilight seeped through cracked panes, he unpacked his Stradivarius, unaware that tonight he would share the stage with a voice from beyond. At first, the music was a whisper, just beyond hearing, like the echo of waves against a distant hull. Evan paused in his warm-up, bow hovering above strings. Silence answered. He lowered the instrument and leaned toward the window. A pale mist curled through the gardens. Moonlight fractured on dew-laden branches. Then came the melody. 4 notes, drawn out and plaintive, slipping through the board and batten siding. It was a violin's lament, neither sorrowful nor joyful, but something in between, an ache. Evan set aside his modern editions and followed the sound up a narrow service stair. The attic corridor lay strewn with crates of china and varnished trunks. Shadows fanned across peeling wallpaper, revealing stylized mermaids and sea serpents, icons of the manor's nautical past. The tune grew clearer, more insistent, weaving through the gloom like a siren's call. Each step quickened his pulse. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the cold air. He found a second, smaller door, unlocked, though its iron latch gleamed new. Inside was a chamber no larger than a coachman's closet, its walls hung with rotting tapestries. A single oil lamp flickered on a rafted beam. Beneath it hovered a translucent figure, a woman in a sodden gown, violin tucked under her chin. Her fingers curved impossibly long, drawing a melody that tugged at Evan's marrow. He raised his violin in answer. The ghost's lips parted in a faint smile. Their notes entwined in the cramped space, his precise vibrato weaving through her mournful arpeggios. The attic planks vibrated, the lamp guttered. Evan's bow moved of its own volition, carried by the current of that otherworldly hymn. He felt a chill bloom at his core as the ghost halted on a fragile trill. Then she nodded, urging him to complete her unfinished adagio. Evan hesitated, recalling a faded journal he'd found earlier in the library. Its final entry, dated 1893, belonged to Annalise Moreau, the manor's last lady of the house. She wrote of an engagement in Paris, of a solo she never played because the séance she held to contact a drowned lover went terribly wrong. The adagio, Annalise vowed, would break the boundary between life and death. With trembling resolve, Evan drew a long, resonant bow across the strings. The note rang out, pure and lingering. The ghost's face softened, tears glimmering like wet pearls. As the final tone faded, a hush swallowed the attic. The lamp flared white. The specter reached for Evan's hand, but her form collapsed into motes of light, drifting upward through the rafters like ashes. Evan stumbled back into the main attic, breath shallow, hands slick with cold sweat. Dawn's first light filtered through the dormer, washing the room in a gentle glow. On the dusty floor lay a single sheet of parchment, and ink still wet. A notation of the lost adagio, Annalise's final song in Evan's own hand. He left Ravenscroft Manor before sunrise, the manuscript tucked in his coat. At his audition, he performed the piece flawlessly, his bow coursing with uncanny emotion. Judges wept. The audience sat spellbound. Yet long after the applause faded, when the world softened into night, Evan heard that plaintive melody winding through his dreams, always accompanied by a whisper.
Play for me once more.